served their lives for the country. And national holiday dedicated to commemorate the sacrifices of the soldiers, and also it celebrates across the country, and mainly you go to the cemetery. I found this interesting article online. You probably cannot guess who this person is. He is one of those veterans who served in the Korean War. And I thought it was kind of sad to go over this news article, but those you can read Korean, you can kind of see what took place here. It is talking about how the veterans are living nowadays. Because of these veterans, that we have this country standing strong today, but we don't often appreciate their work that they have done for us. But instead, they have inherited the poverty to their generations, and they're living day to day with this little bit of earnings. And this person is actually going, it's a sad reality that we face today. But it is honorable thing for us to remember those who served for our country, and not just for Korea, but there's many countries who serve, respect the Memorial Days, and we often forget. And when I was back in the States, I often see those veterans who have served in the Vietnam War or Korean War. They wear their hats in the restaurants, and I actually went over to them and actually shook their hand, and I made sure that I thanked them for serving our country. Because of these people that will sacrifice their lives, that we can have this peaceful status in our country and all over the world right now. So, but as Christians, that we got to look at the Memorial Day and the Christian values together, because we ought to remember something as well as a Christian. Not just for those who serve for our countries, but those who have sacrificed their lives to help us to have the religious freedom, but also the hope for us to go to heaven. Ultimately, that is Jesus Christ, who gave his own life that we could have that hope. So we'll go through some comparisons here. The sacrifice. So the Memorial Day, that we honor those who sacrifice their lives for the nation's freedom and security. But in Christianity, we got to remember Jesus Christ sacrificed on the cross for humanity in redemption, and emphasize love and selflessness as a core value of the Christian walk. Because oftentimes we forget that even though we call ourselves Christians, but we don't know how we have this freedom of religion as a Christian. It is standing upon those sacrifices. What about the remembrance? On Memorial Day, a day of national remembrance with moments of silence and memorial ceremonies, that we set aside a day that we celebrate the Memorial Day as a holiday, and reflects on the braveries of the soldiers and who sacrificed their lives. In Christianity, we ought to remember, and we practice these things in the church and Christian walk as communion service to remind ourselves of the rebirth and how Jesus has given his life so that we can have a new life. And also the Bible stories reminds us of those events that we have to be faithful through the historical lessons. And the services as well. Memorial Day highlights the service and dedication of military personnel and celebrates the contribution and the sacrifice of those who serve the country. But in Christianity, we encourage serving others selflessly, following Jesus' example. And also act of service seen as expressions of faith and love as we do this. Now, there are the principles, the Christian principles of remembrance. There are about 6, I'm sure there's more, but I jotted down to 6, and there are some Bible verses to go with it. So what, as a Christian, principles do you have to remember? First thing I picked out was commemorating Jesus' sacrifice. Ultimately, that's what it is. And remember it through communion service. In Luke 22:19 and 1 Corinthians, it tells us that Jesus told us to do this act, which is a communion service, in remembrance of me. As Christians, we have to remember what God has done for us and what we have to do and what examples that we have to follow. And the second point is recalling God's faithfulness. And throughout Bible, we have Bible narratives in Deuteronomy 5:15. And we find these stories of the Bible heroes in the Old Testament and what they did in order for us to remember of what God has done for them. In Deuteronomy, we find Joshua set 12 stones in different locations in Israel and throughout, that every time they pass through or when they win the battle, they set up a stone so that the nations, the Israelites, could remember what God has done. And for us today, obviously, we don't set up a stone in your house, but we can share our personal testimonies to other people in the church and also to your neighbor to remind ourselves and also help other people to have them remember what God has done in their lives. And memorials and symbols. We find physical memorials and symbolic acts throughout the Bible, and you can find it in Joshua as well. And reflecting on past teachings and scripture studies in Psalm 119:11, that author Solomon tells us to always reflect on our past teachings. And we have to base on our teachings from our Bible. And on our historical faith figures, we find a famous verse in Hebrews chapter 11 of the heroes of the faith, that we can always remember what their lives were like and what lessons we can learn from their lives, so we can remember how to follow those footsteps. And lastly, acknowledging God's commands and promises. Commandments and covenants in Deuteronomy and also in Exodus, God has given us His 10 commandments to follow the footsteps and remember of what we are to do and who we are as Christians. So even though we may not live in a biblical time, that we may forget, we may not physically witness those big miracles, those marvelous acts that was done in the past. Obviously, we don't see those things in our lives that we may not recognize. But there are plenty of miracles that are happening around us and even in our own lives. So, through this holiday that we just had, let us just not enjoy the long holiday saying, oh, let's go, to this vacation place, but help us to remember and let us remember that there has been people in the past who went before us to set this tone for us in our lives with their sacrifice. But ultimately, with Christ's sacrifice, we have this freedom as Christians. So let us remember that. In John 15:13, he says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends," which is Jesus Christ who laid His own life for us. The last slide, I want all of us to read it together, because this is one of my favorite Bible verses in the context, but also it is actually the core value of the plan of salvation. It is found in John chapter 3, verse 16. So let us all read together. "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." So as Christian, I pray that as we leave this building after the church service today, I pray that you will remember who we are, and I pray that you will go out there to share what we're remembering to other people so that we can hasten the coming of Jesus Christ. Let us bow our heads, and we'll close with a prayer for Sabbath school.